Just 34 seconds. One simple question about the Constitution revealed FBI Director Cash Patel's startling unfamiliarity with basic American law in front of 89 million viewers. Senator Jeff Mkeley didn't need classified files or secret evidence. He asked a single fundamental question that any FBI director ought to know. Cameras recorded Patel's halting reply. The Senate chamber went quiet. What constitutional clause did Mkeley pose that forced America's top law enforcement official to show he didn't grasp the core legal basis of his role? This wasn't routine oversight. It was the collision of scholarly exactness and bureaucratic unpreparedness, producing one of the most embarrassing moments of constitutional ignorance in FBI history. April 22nd, 4:17 p.m. Room SD 226. Dirksen Senate Office Building. The atmosphere felt like business as usual for an oversight session. Questions about constitutional compliance were expected. Cash Patel entered with the calm of a seasoned administrator. His charcoal suit and visible FBI badge projected authority, though those same accoutrements would soon spotlight his legal weakness. Behind him were 4 FBI constitutional lawyers and 2 Justice Department advisors, briefcases full of rehearsed answers about FBI practice and federal law. What they hadn't rehearsed for was a senator who would test whether their director actually understood the basic text of the Constitution. Patel's morning briefing had been standard. His chief of staff ran through likely questions, budget items, counterterrorism priorities, administrative fixes. "Nothing tough today, Director," an aide had said. Across the mahogany table sat Senator Jeff Mkeley, appearing more like a longtime constitutional law professor than a partisan interrogator. His gaze had the steadiness of someone who believed the FBI director must master constitutional law. Mkeley's team had reviewed Patel's confirmation hearing, public remarks, and legal record for weeks and found a worrying pattern. Legal references that looked memorized, citations that seemed copied rather than understood. "If Patel doesn't know basic constitutional law," his chief counsel warned, "this will be devastating. We're not talking high theory. We're talking fundamental knowledge every federal agent has." The Senate Judiciary Committee chamber buzzed with ordinary expectation. Reporters anticipated routine questions about agency operations. C-SPAN's live feed carried what most thought would be a predictable exchange. No one expected to watch such a glaring lapse of constitutional knowledge unfold. At exactly 4:17 p.m., Chairman Dick Durbin recognized Senator Mkeley. "The senator from Oregon is recognized for 15 minutes. Mkeley needed less than a minute to dismantle Patel's credibility. Patel began in scripted confidence, prepared for queries about budget lines and policy. "Senator Mkeley, I appreciate the opportunity to discuss the FBI's critical work protecting Americans while upholding our constitutional principles and democratic values," he said, reading from a prepared statement. Media training had armed him for combative lines of questioning about operations, but it couldn't prepare him for what came next. Mkeley looked up from his notes, the expression of a professor about to give an unannounced test. "Director Patel, since you mentioned constitutional principles, let me ask a fundamental question. What does the Fourth Amendment to the United States Constitution say?" The question was deliberately plain. Every law student, patrol officer, and federal agent recites the Fourth Amendment. It is the constitutional basis for search and seizure authority that underpins FBI investigations. Patel's confident mask slipped. He had expected procedural questions, not a request to recite constitutional text. "Senator, the Fourth Amendment relates to protections against unreasonable searches and seizures and the requirement for judicial oversight of federal investigations," he replied. A paraphrase, not a direct quote. Mkeley, precise and unyielding, corrected him. "I asked what it says." "Can you quote the Fourth Amendment?" A sense of gravity spread through the chamber. Mkeley was not testing statutory interpretation. He was checking whether the FBI director knew the actual wording of the provision that governs his agency's power. Patel's advisors exchanged worried looks. FBI General Counsel Amanda Morrison felt a sinking realization. If their director couldn't recite the Fourth Amendment, the damage would be severe. Agents learn the amendment by heart. Their leader should not be an exception. Patel hesitated, visibly struggling. "Senator, The Fourth Amendment establishes that citizens have protection against unreasonable searches and seizures, and that judicial warrants are required for federal investigative actions, he said. Director Mkeley interrupted, voice sharpening. I'm not asking for a paraphrase. Can you quote the Fourth Amendment? He pressed. You're the FBI director. This is the legal foundation of everything your agency does. Can you recite it? The silence that followed was brutal. Patel sat without speaking for nearly 10 seconds, unable to produce the constitutional language governing his agency's authority. His legal team's panic was plain. Television audiences across the country began to realize they were witnessing something extraordinary. Social feeds soon filled with the text of the amendment as viewers supplied the exact wording their FBI director could not. Finally, Patel answered, his voice uncertain. The specific wording involves protections against unreasonable searches and the requirement for warrants based on probable cause. I don't have the exact constitutional text memorized word for word, he admitted. The concession was staggering. The FBI director acknowledging he couldn't quote the Fourth Amendment, a provision every agent is expected to know by memory. You don't have it memorized, Mkeley repeated, each word measured and sharp. Every police officer in America knows the Fourth Amendment. Every FBI agent under your command knows it. But you, as FBI director, don't have it memorized. The comparison was brutal and completely fair. Police academies required recruits to memorize the Constitution. FBI training demanded flawless recitation. Yet, the head of the FBI couldn't perform the very task expected of every trainee agent. Patel's face turned visibly red. Senator, my role involves overseeing complex federal operations that engage numerous constitutional provisions and legal frameworks beyond memorization of specific text, he said, trying to recover. Beyond specific textual memorization, Mkeley echoed with scholarly precision. Director, let me help you. The Fourth Amendment states, the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated and no warrants shall issue, but upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched, and the persons or things to be seized. As Mkeley recited the amendment word for word, the contrast was stark. A senator could quote the Constitution's text perfectly, while the FBI director could not. Now, Director, Mkeley continued evenly, since I've had to teach you the Fourth Amendment, let me ask about the First. Can you quote the First Amendment to the Constitution? The second test was even more devastating. If Patel couldn't recite the Fourth, could he recall any amendment at all? He sat in visible discomfort, unable to respond. Senator, the First Amendment protects freedom of speech, religion, the press, and assembly, as well as the right to petition the government, Patel managed. That's a summary, Mkeley replied instantly. I asked for the text. Can you quote it? Another silence fell, long, heavy, and damning. Patel could not quote the First Amendment either. Senator, Patel said finally, voice strained, while I understand the principles and applications of constitutional law, I do not have specific amendments memorized verbatim. You don't have them memorized? Mkeley repeated, his tone now sharp and deliberate. Director, you swore an oath to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution. How can you defend something you can't even quote? The question struck at the core of Patel's qualifications. He had taken an oath to defend a document he apparently had never studied in depth. Social media erupted within minutes. Hashtags like "Na Patel Constitution," FBI fail, and "ignorant director" began trending worldwide. Mkeley pressed on. Let me try one more. Can you quote the 14th Amendment? The 5th? Any amendment to the Constitution? Patel said nothing. His silence was answer enough. The FBI Director of the United States had been revealed as constitutionally illiterate on live television. Finally, Patel attempted a defense. My legal training focuses on the practical application of constitutional principles rather than the memorization of their exact wording. Practical application? Mkeley repeated, cutting through the air. Director, how can you apply principles you can't even quote? How can you lead an agency tasked with enforcing constitutional law when you don't know what the Constitution says? The questions were impossible to answer. Patel sat motionless, his credibility collapsing under the weight of simple civics. "Let me ask you something simpler," Mkeley continued, now with the patience of a teacher addressing a failing student. "How many amendments are there to the Constitution?" Patel hesitated, then replied uncertainly, 27, Senator? "Good," Mkeley said, a trace of sarcasm in his tone. "You got one right. Now can you name the first 10? Patel's silence spoke volumes. The FBI director couldn't name the Bill of Rights. "Director," Mkeley said, voice tightening with restrained anger, "the first 10 amendments are called the Bill of Rights. They are the foundation of American civil liberties. You are the FBI director, and you can't name them." The shock in the chamber was total. Patel wasn't missing small details. He lacked fundamental knowledge expected of every high school student. Patel tried again. "My focus has been on operational leadership and law enforcement management rather than constitutional memorization." "Constitutional memorization," Mkeley fired back. "Director, this isn't about memorization. This is basic civic knowledge every American should have. You lead the FBI, yet you don't know the Constitution." The hearing room sat in stunned silence as Patel's constitutional ignorance unfolded in real time. Senators and spectators alike watched as the nation's top law enforcement official failed question after question. "Director," Mkeley said finally, preparing to conclude, "let me ask you the simplest question of all. What document begins with the words, 'We the people'?" "The Constitution, Senator," Patel replied quietly. "Excellent," Mkeley answered, the sarcasm unmistakable. "Can you quote the preamble?" Silence again. Patel couldn't recite it either. "Director," Mkeley said with finality, "you can't quote the Fourth Amendment, the First Amendment, or any constitutional provision. You can't name the Bill of Rights. You can't recite the preamble, yet you swore an oath to defend a document you clearly have never read. How can the American people trust you to protect their constitutional rights when you don't even know what those rights are?" The simplicity of the question made it devastating. How could someone defend freedoms they couldn't define? Patel sat in complete defeat, realizing that anything he said would only make it worse. "I have no further questions," Mkeley said quietly. His job was done. The room remained still as the full weight of Patel's ignorance settled over the chamber. The FBI director had been exposed as unfit for office, not through scandal or corruption, but through the absence of basic constitutional understanding. The aftermath was immediate and unprecedented. Within minutes, Washer's constitutional ignorance was trending globally. News outlets interrupted regular programming to analyze the extraordinary exchange that had just taken place. That evening, as America absorbed the most humiliating constitutional moment in modern congressional history, one fact was clear: Cash Patel's career was finished. Not because of misconduct, but because he had been exposed as profoundly ignorant of the document he had sworn to defend. Those 34 seconds, the question that began it all, would be remembered as the moment when knowing the Constitution became the minimum qualification for leading America's top law enforcement agency.